Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leese here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. And we're so glad that you could join us today from coast to coast to coast in this incredible country. And we're going to talk about this nation and what's going on. And we're very keen to hear your comments. We really appreciate that as the audience comes on board here. And I would tell you that we truly are delighted to talk with our audience, Canadians who care about this country, and we get a number of international visitors as well who have a keen eye on Canada. It's hard to believe that it's May 14 already, and good afternoon, Prairie, as well. We've got our roundup of regulars and Matthew. We are so grateful. It's interesting. The last many weeks we've had significant numbers, not only on the live discussion, but also you may know that we upload this with Madam Producer Lorraine's kind technical leadership. We load up the program as a recording. And it's interesting, we're getting 15, 20, 30,000 views off this live discussion. So that's heartwarming. And I know that as I travel around the country, I do hear encouraging comments from people who say, hey, look, David, I really appreciate the thoughtful way that you're having this conversation with so many interesting guests who really bring a perspective. And today is no difference. We have quite a lineup of guests joining us, and I think you'll be quite intrigued to hear more from them later. But tell us about what you think when it comes to Canada. And without sounding too dramatic, is this our last chance to bring it together? We know we have lots of challenges in this country as spring sprouts up across the nation, whether it's not just the economy and moving us forward. We've had a lot of economic stagnation, quite frankly, the last 10 years, but we have a lot of major policy decisions that relate to the constitutional unity of our country. So what should we do about it? What's the prescription? We'd love to hear your insights on what to do. Often at the Frontier Center for Public Policy, we try to emphasize a thoughtful perspective on this when it comes to following the basics well. And hi to you, Cindy, from Alberta. We'd love to know where our audience is from. Please tell us, and be sure to like the program. That helps us with those mysterious algorithms in the background. But please like us and share it if you think what we're talking about is important, because we know that a lot has been going on. And we know that this week, the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, coming off an election, appointed a new cabinet. So we'll get to that. But also from our guests, what do they see as the state of our country, and what is the prescription? So the doctors are in the house, so to speak, as we talk about this. And Robert is from Mississauga. I know that Robert's made a lot of insightful comments over our discussions, and we really appreciate that as well. And Maria from Saskatchewan. We have an incredible country. We all know that we love this country. We want our country to succeed. We want this new government to succeed, regardless of our party stripe. We appreciate that. So Prairie says, I'm hoping we can turn things around, but it may be too little too late. And that is in many ways the question for today. And Laurie says, I'm an Albertan and absolutely support separation and independence from Canada. So, it's really something. As I talk with people across the country, including Western Canada, there's a lot of concern about whether it makes sense to belong to this incredible federation. You may recall that our country was founded in 1867. And so one of the questions I'm going to ask our guests is, if you had to do it all over again, would it make sense to put this country together? Would it make sense, for instance, Alberta, Saskatchewan, others to join this incredible country? So sometimes these are what are known as thought exercises. So we won't be afraid to get into that. So without further ado, I want to welcome our guests onto the program. I want to welcome a good friend, Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve. And Michel, it's great to see you back on the program. We had an incredible conversation a number of weeks ago about your book, which I highly recommend, In Defense of Canada. And a warm welcome to you, and bonjour.
Merci beaucoup, David. A pleasure to be here. Merci de m'avoir invité.
Well, it's great to see you because, Michelle, you bring a host of experience, certainly in senior leadership within the armed forces, and you've given a lot of thought to prescriptions. I'm mixing up the word subscriptions with prescriptions in terms of moving our country forward. So a warm welcome to you. And then I also want to welcome Robert-Falcon Ouellette. And Robert, you have become a good friend because we talk a lot about many things, including public policy. And you're a former MP from the Liberal Party. So you bring a perspective across this country. You're also on faculty at the University of Ottawa. So great to see you.
Happy to be here as well. I'm looking forward to the debate and discussion.
That's great. And I believe you were just addressing us in Cree. Is that correct?
Yes, that's not French. That was the Cree language. So for those who can't who wonder what I was saying, I was just saying I'm just proud to be here. All my relations.
Well, that's great. Well said. And so great to see you, Robert. And I know that Dorothy Dobbie, a former MP as well from Winnipeg, is with us. And Dorothy, you have been a great friend. And I tell you, bring a lot of wisdom and insight to, well, what ails this country, what makes it great as well. So welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you. Glad to be here. And so good to see Robert and also the General, whom I only met once, but it was a pleasure listening to you, General, when you were in Winnipeg last time.
Thank you very much, Dorothy.
So as you can see, audience, we've got an incredible team here. I tell you, they're people that I would definitely go into any kind of challenging situation because I know they've got a lot of wisdom and heart and care for this country. So on that note, I wanted to just kind of go around the table here a little bit and set the stage and ask the question, where do you think we're at as a country right now? Is it a good place? Is it one where we've got to pay attention and adjust our course? I know it's a complex question, but where do you think we're at, Robert? Do you want to take a stab at that one?
No, I guess no problem going first. It's always the tough part, but there are major challenges that Canada is facing right now. I think mainly the cost of affordability in life for people in the supermarket, for families. It's very, very expensive with children. I think the government's gotten off track of the usual consensus. I think the immigration system, unfortunately, was used in a way that perhaps didn't lead to the intended outcomes, or perhaps people weren't thinking about those outcomes. It's led to now situations in universities across the country where there's going to be cutting in post-secondary institutions at the college levels because there are less students because the government's now reeled that back, less housing. And these are things that we've all been talking about now for a year, but it just doesn't seem that we have solutions, and there's issues with productivity in our economy, and it just goes on and on the list, and things didn't seem quite so bad. It seemed, they were kind of broken, but the pandemic certainly was an accelerator of these long-standing issues, and certainly pushed some of the systems that we were kind of limping along over the edge, and now it seems to be all completely broken.
Okay, so to sum up there, you've cited themes like affordability, the whole challenges of productivity in the economy, and you also referenced in the universities relative to, I assume it's international students, the challenges where there's
well, the universities make huge amounts of money, David, from international students who come in. They pay much higher school fees to attend the universities, and because the provinces haven't been keeping pace with inflation and the cost of offering education at both the college and the university levels, the universities and colleges got used to that level of funding, and now we're going to see a lot of cutbacks in Ontario, Manitoba, in British Columbia. We're going to see it right across the country, and the shutting of programs, and even the reduction in perhaps areas that people think might be very foundational to the Canadian economy. And I'm not just talking about post-secondary where people thinking we're studying theology or philosophy. I'm talking about programs that are going to have an impact on the Canadian economy because there is just a lack of funding. and the universities became used to what they were able to get from the international students without the support of provincial governments, which haven't kept pace with what some of their responsibilities.
All right, so that's a great summary, Robert. If I turn to you, Michel, what would be your summary of the challenges that we face as a nation?
Well, you and I have talked about this many times before, and I really resume it as there's a crisis of leadership in our country and a crisis of indifference, if you wish, of complacency. And I think this has led us to where we are today. The major problem, I think, right now is one of hope. Canadians don't have hope, and it's for all the reasons that Robert mentioned, such as cost of living, affordability, housing, immigration, anti-Semitism. And speaking of universities, there's a lot of anti-Semitism in there. So the first thing is hope, I think, for me. The second one is the economy. Deficits, continue to be plaguing us. Our debt has been doubled. Our productivity is way down. We're not using our resources to help Canadians rebuild the economy. The third problem, I would say, unity. And as we know right now, there's an issue of unity out west, and they have correctly, I think they have a real reason to be questioning, Canadian desire to keep the West in Canada, and of course in Quebec as well. There's a rise in the Parti Québécois side of things. There's fear of the U.S. in terms of unity. It is a huge issue. The fourth one is the Canadian Armed Forces. You and I have talked about that as well, how the armed forces are in dire straits, and it's going to take years to fix them, and there's a lack of sense of urgency to do it. Our relations with the U.S., and we will not be able to improve relations with the U.S. or renegotiate our relationship unless we fix our own damn country, and that is where we are today. Internationally, NATO, the United Nations. And I would add the last thing would be this focus on climate change, which I just cannot understand how it has to be such a high priority right now, where in Canada we only produce 1.6% of the greenhouse gases of the world. So, in a couple of words, it's a crisis of leadership and a crisis of complacency. Leadership by our leaders and complacency by ordinary Canadians who, unfortunately, have not been involved. There was a little bump in patriotism after Trump. Why did it take Trump to make us feel patriotic when we have an incredible country? And unfortunately, what we see now after the election, the cabinet, complacency is returning. Indifference is returning. Canadians now are looking forward to the summer. Things will carry on, and so complacency is a huge issue in Canada.
Okay, wow, what a powerful summary. So from leadership to complacency and a lot of things in between there. And we're going to break that down over this discussion. So thank you very much, Michel. And it's also interesting that you mention a lack of hope. What do you mean by that? To ask a silly question.
Well, I think all the issues that Robert mentioned, that I mentioned as well, affordability, young people are voting for the Conservatives because they thought that plan was great to improve, housing, affordability, cost of living, using our resources to make us richer. But right now, and this lack of hope that we have, I think Canadians were looking for who was going to bring hope to our country. And okay, we've got now a new prime minister, and I'm willing to give him the time to see if he can sort things out. But I don't think he's got much time. And if he doesn't show quickly some low-hanging fruit, fixing a few low-hanging fruit, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, there you have it. So Dorothy, Dobbie, what's your analysis? So where are we at as a country? How do you view it?
Well, I'm not quite as depressed as the other two guys are, because I guess by nature I'm optimistic. But it always does come down to leadership, and the kind of leadership we've had in the last little while. It has focused on things that are negative and scary. Fear is a great, powerful tool, and we've been running from fear for the last 6 years. COVID beginning and then carrying through, and when people see how powerful using fear as a weapon is, it gets used even more because you can mold people into the way you want them to be. So fear has been there, and fear led us through the last election. And if people are complacent, it's when fear goes away, they just are relieved. I don't want to think about it anymore. I just want to get on with my life because I can't stand this emotional upheaval that's going on day after day. And so what we need right now is, we go back, as the general says, to leadership. Leadership is always the key. And it has to be a leadership of hope and a leadership of joy, a leadership of, we can do this. We've got what it takes. And hey, I know there are challenges, but we're going to overcome them because we can. We're Canadians, we're strong, we're intelligent, we're resourceful. I think the weather keeps us on our toes. And the worst thing that we can do is give up hope. Yes, we're going to have challenges. Yes, we have a new government, well, an old government with a new leader, and we'll see how he does. And we'll take that one step at a time. But we have other people waiting in the wings. If this fellow fails, what we see is a new Pierre Poilievre coming out looking far more positive and hopeful than he has in the past. And maybe he's learned a lesson from this election too. So I'm just saying, Canadians, don't give up hope. But for goodness sakes, stay involved. And don't just listen to what people say. Do some research on your own. Because there's just so many different, so many supposedly different opinions. Although what I am concerned about is the attempt to shut down any dissenting opinions. That's always a very dangerous place to be in a democracy. So ask questions. Don't be intimidated if somebody beats you up because you don't have the same, opinion that they do. Don't get angry. Don't call them names. Speak reasonably. Put forward your argument. And sometimes it makes a difference. Sometimes it doesn't. But they listen, even if they're still fighting you when they stop. It's like having kids, no, Dad, I'm not doing that. And then he goes to bed. Well, it's like that with everybody. We all sort of have to resist to keep our dignity. But when we hear reasonable explanations, we do respond.
Okay, well, Dorothy, I'm inspired by your summary as well, all three of you, quite frankly, in the sense that what I sense you're doing is you're recognizing the challenges before us, but also reminding us to try to, how do you keep that perspective of hope in a constructive spirit? Because obviously, once we've lost that, then we've kind of lost the fight, so to speak. But we've really got to get with the program. You'd still say there's quite an urgency to move this country forward. Would you say, Dorothy?
Well, is it as urgent as people make it sound? Yeah, we got to move it forward, and we'll see what the policies are coming up. And if they aren't the right policies, I think there'll be changes. I have faith in the Liberal Party and the members there that many people who belong to that party will not put up with wrong decisions. If there's a complete focus on let's change this to an electric world, we know that's not realistic. So there will be resistance to that, I hope, within the caucus. And I think that Canadians themselves will move forward in a way that is constructive. I'm working on a project for a new port on Hudson Bay, and we're feeling very optimistic that we can make this happen, even though there's resistance to the idea of pipelines. So we've got an alternative way of doing it. That's what we are as Canadians. We're energetic, we're creative, and when somebody says you can't go this way, we're not. We find another way. We find another path around it. I think we can still do this.
All right. Well, thanks for that can-do attitude.
David, if I could just jump in, I really like what Dorothy said. The only thing I guess, and I particularly like your point about dialogue and how people can get involved and have a discussion. I think too often in our country we fail to bridge that gap of people who have different ideas, different views, and so we need to really. We need to have a dialogue as Canadians as to which way do we want to go and how. So I'm fully on board with you, and I'm on board with the hope, with the positive. You've got to look at the future, and we are going to be able to fix it. The thing I take issue with, though, that you said is you don't think it's not an urgent thing. I really do believe it is urgent. I believe we need a sense of urgency, and if I look, for example, at what's happening in the Canadian Armed Forces. I truly feel that the armed forces are using the same business approaches, the same processes to try and fix a problem that requires a complete revolution in the approach. And I don't know if it also applies to the government writ large, but certainly in the armed forces. And so I do believe there is a sense of urgency that we need to have with this.
I don't deny that. And I also would like to go back to what Robert said about universities. I think there's a change happening there, and we have to be prepared for it. And we're a little bit afraid of change. So yes, absolutely, we have to clean up the mess with our armed forces and begin to recruit people and give them a reason for serving and showing that that's an honorable thing to do. In universities, they've had I talked with Lloyd actually about this 10 or 15 years ago, that there had to be a change in the way they were operating because it was no longer meeting today's needs in the way it used to. And so now what I see are a lot of kids going to 2 years of community college and then 2 years of university just to get a degree because the paper seems to be important, but their intense learning in those first 2 years is what really sees them through their career. So yes, there's time for changes, time for some things that seem revolutionary. But what I meant by, I don't mean that it's not urgent. What I mean is that I don't think that we're falling apart. I think that we just have to step back and say, hold on here, guys. Let's move forward in a reasonable way. Let's look at these issues in a realistic way and try and find avenues to success instead of giving up our hands and, having fits and letting our hair grow on fire, because that ain't going to do us no good.
Okay, well, great discussion. I am going to turn to Robert in a sec here, but I'm having this discussion with former MPs Dorothy Dobbie and Robert-Falcon Ouellette, as well as retired Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve. We've got a lot of comments from the audience, including, I think there's a comment from Doc Holliday who said, Canada is done. Time to save ourselves from Ontario and Quebec. So there's a perspective. I know that in conversation with various leaders within the sovereignty movement in Alberta, they would say Canada is broken. It's time to get out. And that's a tough one to hear. Great to be back. Says decades of Liberals and Conservatives government, and look what's happening to Canada. So, gosh, there's a lot of questions and comments coming in from the chat here, and we really do appreciate it. Zach says Quebec receives the most in equalization payments from a province they despise. I think that references Alberta. Laugh out loud. And then Robert Kerr says leadership is important, but we must have the right priorities set and sense of urgency. We continue to have a declining standard of living due to pursuing the wrong priorities. So, Robert, what are your observations here? How do you look at this question again in terms of walking the line of hope and the sense of urgency in action?
Well, I think you're referring there. A number of the comments I've been watching as well online are talking about Alberta Separation, which I think is going to be a big topic today. For anyone who, obviously, I understand that there's a lot of anger with how things have gone for not all people in the economy, but many people in the Canadian economy. When you're a senior and you're in a fixed income and prices go up and you can't afford the eggs and you can't afford the apartment, you're being pushed out. It can feel really rough, and that's not right. And it seems that the economy, the way inflation works with the deficits, has had a really strong and powerful impact on people's lives and their ability to have a good life. At the same time, we see that anger in Alberta, and we've seen it for the last 10 years about pipelines, access to markets, some pipelines moving forward, some not moving forward, the ability to get a good price for our petrol and our natural resources, and then how much is paid in equalization. And for me, when I see equalization now, so we have to recognize as Canadians, Canada's worked well because we have a solidarity system, not in the union sense, but in the sense that if you move to Nova Scotia or you move to British Columbia or Manitoba or anywhere else, or in the Northwest Territories, you have you're able to access the same level of services in healthcare and in education, and it ensures that we have this general basic quality of life for all Canadians in the public services that we need. And to do that, it requires government resources, and the richer provinces help out the poorer provinces. Obviously, people who pay probably feel a little bit upset about that, but at the end of the day, it really makes it helps make Canada function. I would say to people, like, how couldn't, Dorothy mentioned this, get involved in political parties, get involved in the Liberal Party and tell them what you think at their annual convention, get involved in the NDP and tell them what you think, and obviously the Conservative Party. But if you're all in the same party, it's, it gets a little bit easier to ignore us against them, and it's not good. I just think this whole issue about Alberta separation, it's an interesting debate, but I think it's going to be very hard to do. There is the Clarity Act, which was passed after Quebec separation and referendums, and Jacques Parizeau spent almost a decade preparing that question, going internationally to New York and the United Nations and France and the U.S., preparing allies and others. What would they do if a separation was declared after a question? Any question put forward towards people has to be clear and has to be understood by the population, has to have a clear majority. I'm not sure that there's a 60% or 55% majority of Albertans who are in favor of separation. And I'm not even sure if people's actually, I think it's kind of a deflection. People are using this to deflect from some of the real issues, taking away time from things which are much more important. I'd prefer to be talking about corridors and on resources and how do we get our resources to other markets rather than the United States. How do we deal with tariffs? What's the proper climate change policies, the Canadian military? But instead of that, we're talking about a thing which is a little bit sky in the pie for me. Obviously important to many Albertans, but at the end of the day, not. I don't think it's something that's going to get a long go. We had separation talk back in the 90s in Alberta, and it never really got anywhere. It did lead to the Reform Party and the change of the Conservative Party, and it led to, when people started working together, it led to the Stephen Harper government, which was a considerable change from the few decades of Liberal government of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, which was different and important to have a rebalancing on the political spectrum and the way that people thought about the economy in the political world.
Yeah, no, excellent comments, Robert. So within the discussion, and I really appreciate what's coming in from the audience. I did want to shift a little bit in our conversation and talk about the new federal government. And there's a lot of moving parts here. We're going to get back to unity, the economy. Obviously, national defense is a big issue. But if we look at the new government, Prime Minister Mark Carney is there with his new cabinet. I could go through the list in great detail, but I won't. But I'm wondering what your take is on this new cabinet. It's almost like there's a bit of recycling going on here from previous cabinets. We've got people like, Sean Fraser and Anita Anand there. You've got, a lot of familiar faces. Even Chrystia Freeland, I think, is in there. I think that's where she is, being congratulated by the Prime Minister. We've also got some shifts, but a lot of the familiar faces are back. They're still there. So what does this mean in terms of your optimism that we'll see a new course in terms of policies that, I would respectfully suggest have gotten to Canada into a bit of a pickle the last 10 years in terms of all these kinds of issues that we've talked about. In all fairness, they've also inherited a lot. I mean, they've got a lot of debt and deficits that have been carried on by many governments, regardless of their partisan stripe. But what's your read? Do you see hope in this new government, or is it kind of looking like more of the same? And I'm wondering, Michel, if you want to go first, and then Dorothy, and then back to Robert.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few of the usual suspects that are in there that doesn't make me feel very good. I mean, I think Canadians wanted some change, and obviously, if we'd gone with a majority or minority Conservative government, they would probably would have been. There would definitely been more change because the ministers would all be new ministers. But in this case, I would grade it as a C. I think he's kept some bad wood in there. For example, Stephen Guilbeault, I think a horrible minister in my view. Chrystia Freeland got us in all these deficits, and even François-Philippe Champagne, who is really, I don't think, going to be a very good Minister of Finance. He's got some good that's come in. I think some of the new ones. Dalton McGuinty as the Minister of National Defence, I have high hopes for him. He's a pretty decisive guy. I think he'll do well. He's got a huge challenge with the armed forces. There's Minister Hodgson as well, who has some experience out west and in private business, and is apparently one of the guys who's very capable, from what I hear from some of my colleagues. So there's some good and there's some bad. So I give it a middling grade, and I guess everything will be in the proof will be in the pudding once we see the actions being taken. So far, I'm not impressed. Well, obviously, some of the statements that Guilbeault's made and Gregor Robertson, the Minister of Housing, for crying out loud, I think that's not boding well. But I want to stay positive, and I want to give the Prime Minister some time to grip his cabinet, and we'll see what happens. But things like no budget that somebody just wrote there, absolutely right. We need to know what the priorities of the government are going to be. I mean, 2 weeks ago, quietly, the government voted $30 billion for government operations, including an extra $178 million for the CBC. In today's environment, with the deficits we have, do we want to give $178 million to CBC? I don't. And so that doesn't bode well for, in my view, for the future.
What do you, well said. So what are your thoughts, Dorothy, on this new cabinet?
Well, first of all, I don't see it being very different from the old one. We have to remember that there was a strong relationship between Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Carney prior to this. We also know that Christia, for example, has a very close relationship. Mr. Carney is godfather to her son. So, and there are many other relationships in the caucus. Evan Solomon is another one, and I can go on and on and on and name them. So this is not going to be very different from the last cabinet. And I think the personalities are very much the same. My way or the highway, everything goes through me. So does it really matter who you are in that, in that cabinet? It looks, we're hearing that this is going to be a much more collaborative, open, let's work together. I'm going to, sign my job and run this like a corporation. But I've worked in many corporations, and not all corporate bosses are as democratic as others. So I don't see, what I see here is Carney as the leader, and is his ideas, his viewpoint, his mission that they will be working to fulfill. I've read his book. I don't know if any of the others of you have. But that is very clearly stated that he sees a different world, that he feels that he and some other people can create for us, because they know better than we do what that world should look like. And yes, we heard the mention of we only contribute 1.46% to the total emissions if climate change is really an issue. And I'm trying to weigh that against well, I see so many contradictions. So on one hand, we're hearing all these lovely words. On the other hand, I see somebody who invests heavily in fossil fuels in other places, but who has this dream of an electric world that they want to try out on Canada. I'm having a hard time with that. I don't know about others. It's very much like, I have a plan and then we don't have a budget sort of thing. So I'm willing to give him a chance, but I'm not very hardened right now by what I see. And if he doesn't show that he has the ability to lead in a collaborative way, and that includes listening to premiers, and I really feel sorry for Alberta in this. Look, I got to say, first of all, I was there during the last separation movement. I was very front and center with that. I led one of those big committees, and I've heard all the arguments for separation and all the arguments for no separation. And the same thing I said to Quebec is what I would say to Alberta. You're landlocked. You're stuck. Canada's not going to let you do this. So stop it. Think about what we can do together to make things work better. I don't blame Danielle for threatening, because I think she's very frustrated. And I don't blame the folks who say we've got to do this, but really stop and think. We are not going to split the country up. We're going to find ways to fix it. And we are going to have to work with a government that, as I said before, I think based on what we see in that cabinet, that picture you just showed, is very much the same type of government we had before, with a slightly different, stronger move towards the climate initiative.
Okay, your comments, Robert?
Well, it's the Canadian government, and we've changed the Prime Minister, and because it's Canadian government, the Prime Minister is very, very important. And I think we've seen in the past number of decades how the role of MPs has been declining. They were certainly much more important in the Brian Mulroney era, and a little less so in the Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and slowly during Stephen Harper and now Trudeau. They were, very merely influencers in some ways within systems, but sometimes not very powerful at all, and even cabinet ministers. And I think with the I'm waiting to see who the chief of staff of Mark Carney is going to be. I think that's going to tell us a lot, and maybe there'll be more information about who that person is, because that person, I think, is going to really establish the way the government's going to work. And I think they're probably not putting out a budget simply because they don't have that chief of staff really in place yet to really establish what those priorities are. Because the ministers are going to be, the way the government functions is, there's the Privy Council's office, the Prime Minister's office, the chief of staff, the Prime Minister, and then, the minister. And, the Prime Minister wants to control as many of those things as possible. And the minister's role, while they might seem important, sometimes they're just a mere functionary of what they've been told to do. They do have mandate letters and some discretionary ability, but at the end of the day, the large and big things are done by the Prime Minister's office, and that's this level of government we have. And probably the issue I think we have is a lot of our backbench MPs, even our cabinet ministers, don't take it upon themselves to put themselves out. They play the game thinking perhaps this is the long term. They might get a promotion, might not get a promotion, want to play on the same team. And it leads to this system where when things do start going wrong, they're afraid to speak up about it because they've been so quiet for so long. So how do you actually say anything? But I think Mark Carney in of itself will be significantly different. Obviously has a banking background. He's been thinking about productivity. I don't know how successful he's been as the governor of the Bank of England. I've heard different things about his success level, but does he have an understanding of working Canadians? Does he understand the country and how various parts work? Does he understand Quebec properly? He can speak some French. That's going to be really important. If he screws up in some ways, it might have a huge impact, not just on Alberta, but on Quebec. And we have might have this separation on both sides. He could make things work, or he could make things even far worse. We don't know. But it's going to take some time to know who that chief of staff is, who's going to be the one carrying out his vision overall.
Okay, so I think that's an incisive analysis, Robert, in the sense that there's machinery of government here, in the sense that if you look at this through the lens of a political scientist, the question is, and this has been some of your analysis from Dorothy Dobbie's paper at Frontier about the need to renew the role of MPs, but the roles of even cabinet ministers have been greatly diminished. And so the real question is, what's the team behind the team? In the sense that we've got the same kind of team with maybe the exception of Trudeau. I think a member of our audience said that it's the same looking cabinet with the exception of Trudeau's absence, which is kind of humorous. But the real question will be, yes,
and also no different colored socks, David. Don't forget this.
Different colored socks, indeed. Well taken. So what direction incisively will the new Prime Minister take with the other machine behind the team there in terms of deputy ministers, chiefs of staff, that team? So we will see. So I think people are looking carefully at that. But I will tell you that it is interesting as I look at the sense of urgency, and I want to come back to that question because from my perspective, I think there is an urgency, whether we like it or not, in this country. And that is both on the economic front. I look at the situation, the need to get on with stabilizing our trade relationships internationally, including the United States, as they cut more deals with a number of parties. There's you've got a picture of the President Donald Trump meeting with the Prime Minister on the seats of those famous yellow chairs. And, they're trying to thread the needle of reinventing the relationship. There's a fist pump, which is interesting. I almost chuckled when I saw that. They're kind of imitating some body language. So that's intriguing. We could go into the psychology of that one. But we do know that our economy in Canada is stagnated. We've seen the last 10 years from the International Monetary Fund. We are not growing. Here's that famous graph that has made the rounds here, as Canada's that little red dot there at the top, compared to our other counterparts across the OECD countries, with the United States at a mere 21% the last 10 years. So that's a problem. And I look at this and I say, from an economic point of view, I could show you all kinds of other data. But the bottom line is, if you've got a 30, 40, even over the next few years, a 50% income differential, and this is based on what's called purchasing power parity. So it's a fair apples to apples comparison. It's not like a simple straight up exchange rate, but it's based on what you can purchase using a same currency. I think that becomes a problem for Canada. And I look at this historically at the turn of the century. We had a lot of people. I think 50% of the people coming into the country just went to the United States because there just wasn't the opportunity. So people go downhill like water for opportunity. So I think that's where I sense urgency with the economy. And we can talk about getting that back on track, but it's also the unity question. I think that's where I think there's a real time frame. I know that Daniel Smith, as an example, has put on the table a kind of an accord of issues that they want to negotiate with the federal government on, conditions, and saying these things need to change so we can work together. But also there will likely be some form of referendum around separation going into 2026. So I think that urgency is there. Or am I being too dramatic about this? What do you think, Michel? What's your take?
Well, no, I don't think you're being dramatic. I think you're bang on. There is an urgency to this. And let me make a couple of other comments on maybe some of the stuff that Robert said and so on. But there is an urgency. This government, this current government that we just voted in now, had time to plan for the first 100 days. So I do not understand why there was no plan to take some specific actions immediately as soon as they took over. So and I know that the Conservatives would have they had a plan. They were ready to go, and they knew what they wanted to do. There were three things he wanted to do, I think, right off the bat, and he would have recalled Parliament immediately. But now it seems that we're going back to business as usual. There's no urgency. There's no sense of urgency. We're just going to carry on the same way as we've always done. This whole idea.
So if I could just clarify then. So, yeah. Michel, you're saying that silence in itself is a signal that nothing has changed.
Absolutely. And this really scares me. And I say I want to be positive. I want the Prime Minister to succeed. I want to see if he can succeed and help him and back him and give him the time also to show that he can succeed. But really, I mean, in any government, the first 100 days, I mean, we heard what happened with Trump the first 100 days, and it was the most, the best, the hugest government in 100 days. But really, it seems that in Canada, we're going with business as usual. The other thing is on the unity question. Look, our country is massive. The size of our country, the regionalism of our country makes it very difficult. I've often wondered whether Canada can be governed with just one central government, or whether it'd be better if we were a number of smaller countries, the Atlantic provinces, for example, and Quebec by itself, Ontario, the West, BC is completely different, the North, so it is a real challenge to, if you wish, to lead this huge country with these different, and what I think we are much stronger being united. I mean, Alberta as part of our country makes our country extremely strong in the resource sector, for example, even Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And then you look at Quebec, the duality of languages and cultures from the original, not the original, because the First Nations were original, but the European founders of our country. So that's a great, I think, a great strength of our country. But we have to find some way of us staying united and being led by a government that will continue to unite us and make sure that there's everybody has a voice in it. So anyhow, those are some of the things that I thought about.
No, very interesting, and I'm very impressed by the comments coming in from the audience. Zach says we have size and resources, but it's all staying in the ground. The frustration with not being able to get things built in this country. I mean, I look back at I'm a big fan of history, as you know, and Pierre Burton. I just encourage people to read all kinds of incredible Canadian history. It's just incredible. But the building of the railway was done in a matter of years with determination. And so one of the things I wanted to share with you is an interesting clip from a gentleman by the name of Premier Wabkanu from Manitoba. And he had a very interesting comment. And I know he's written a letter, I just saw it today, about the building of utility corridors. I think both Dorothy and Robert have alluded to that. So I want to share this clip with us, and I want to discuss it. Is it a sign of hope?
The one that I was raising on the call is a northern trade corridor. There's been so much talk about connecting resources in Western Canada to Tidewater and Hudson Bay. I think now's the time for us to go out into the market, the private sector, and see if that's something real, if that's something that the business community can make happen with financing. So here in Manitoba, we're working with the Indigenous nations, working on that conversation to see what the appetite is. Can we get products, whether it's ag, mining, energy products, to market in our northern port here in Manitoba, the Port of Churchill?
So there you have it. It's an interesting statement, a concept. The whole idea is to have a multi-wide corridor, if you will, utility corridor across the west to Hudson's Bay that would enable us to trade better. And I think, to be very clear about this, address a very significant issue. And actually, Frontier the other week, we released a calculator that's online. You can see it. And it shows the differential of the oil and gas that we fail to get because we don't get world prices. And this is kind of like frankly, an outrageous scandal because we only have one primary customer, namely the United States there. It's a dynamic number, but we basically forfeit easily $30 billion a year in terms of not being able to get those world prices. It's crazy. So we're leaving money on the table. And so, Dorothy, I know that you're very familiar with this kind of proposal of a utility corridor. Is Wabkanu onto something here? Is he on the right track?
Working on it for about 7 years. And so I think, oh, sorry, my mic was off. I think we've got a really good chance to make this happen. So it would be a game changer for all of Canada if we could use Hudson Bay, not Churchill particularly, because that port is pretty small, it's pretty old, and it has some limitations in that it's not open for 12 months of the year. But just not far away down the coast from there, towards the east, is Port Nelson, which is where originally most of the trade in this part of the world, in the center part of North America, began back 400 and some years ago, 411, something like that, and has continued for all that time to be a major contributor to this, to the prosperity of Manitoba, and now possibly to the prosperity and to the release or the almost a kind of liberation of central Canada. And I'm talking about geographically central Canada, not the one that everybody thinks is being Ontario. So Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta have been at the mercy of the East and the West for all of their lives. And this would give us an opportunity to reach a port, to reach the world through a port that is closer to Europe, easier to reach even than some of the ports on the West Coast, because we don't have to go through the Panama Canal to manage some of these some of these markets that we have. And it would allow us not just to take oil and gas, because that's of course an important commodity, or LNG, which is what we would like to produce, but also to take all of the manufactured goods that come from this part of the country. I don't think people know that fire trucks are made in Manitoba, or that it has a huge aircraft industry, or that I can go on and on and on. It's still quite a good manufacturing province. And Saskatchewan and Alberta have been catching up too and doing much more of this kind of work. There's also all the grain that we produce and all of the agricultural products that we feed the world. And these things have been at the mercy of ports on both sides of us, and south of us. So we talk about oil and gas. We send 97% of our oil and gas to the United States. We send heavy oil. Guess what happens? It goes down there. They have the only plant that makes LNG. So they sell it at something like 10 times what we sell it to them for. And we've got this huge gap in the middle where they're taking profits. One guy in New York said to one of our fellows, Robin, why do you Canadians let us do this to you? Because it's just so blatantly obvious highway robbery of the resources that we have. And so in some ways, when you look at this whole mess with Trump and what's going on with the country, maybe it's a wake-up call. Maybe it's a wake-up call that we needed, where we begin to say, wait a minute, we can do this on our own. We can reach out to these markets. We can build a railway. We can build a port. We've done bigger than that, as you just mentioned, back in the day. And when you think about it, that was a mega project back in those days. Well, this is a mega project now, but it's highly doable. Wob, I think, is coming to that conclusion. I know he wants Manitoba to have a stake in it, and I want them to too. How we do that, I guess, will be a matter of negotiation. And we certainly want to have Alberta and Saskatchewan having just as big a stake, because this is a tri-province, event. It's not just a one province taking advantage of everybody else. Most recently, Ontario is very interested because they have a lot of resources in the Ring of Fire that they'd like to get out to world markets, and this is a much easier, cheaper way to do it. So we're feeling very, very positive about the future. And you mentioned business as usual. No, it's not business as usual. If it were business as usual, we would be fat and lazy relying on the United States. Time to stop that. Time to get out there and do what we have to do.
Well, I like the way you're talking there, Dorothy. Let's get on with moving this economy forward. What do you say, Robert?
Actually, I think there's a certain irony. Is the Hudson's Bay and the Northwest Company in the Canadian history, they fought a battle over the route from Montreal to Winnipeg to get the furs out and the goods in, and the Hudson's Bay using the route from the north, and there was certainly profit in it. But I think Wab Kinew, as the First Nations leader, as well as the Premier of Manitoba, can play a significant role in this, because I think there's going to be significant issues in discussions with First Nations and ensuring that everyone who is around the table comes to the table in a good way, and meaning that we're not showing up with oversized expectations about what we can get right away, but actually what we can build in the long term together. And hopefully it seems that Premier Kinew is really committed to developing the economy of Manitoba, which will obviously improve the economy for everyone, because if Manitoba makes a little bit more money and Alberta makes a little bit more money, we're all going to be much, much better off. At the same time, I just want to point out that at the same time, we have to be adding value to these products that are leaving our country.
Indeed.
Too often, we send stuff down to the United States for transformation of oil products, and it's shipped north again. And we need to be doing that at home. I'm not saying we have to supply the world, but we should at least be able to supply ourselves and produce our own gasoline in our country and supply Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I remember there was an issue with some minor pipe broke coming from the south, and we had no gasoline in Winnipeg, and it was one of the first things that Premier Kinew was dealing with in Manitoba, is we had a shortage of gasoline, and where the price is going to spike, and what was that going to do, and he was running around trying to make sure, keep people calm. There will be gasoline in everyone's gas tank, and it will be not too expensive.
And what's exciting about I just wanted to add, what's exciting about this project is that it's very, very dependent on the folks, the Fox Lake Cree Nation, which has the rights to from their place near Gillam, which is where all the hydro development started, up to the coast. And they will be the key owners of this. They will have the controlling interest if we have our way. And the rest of the corridor, which you heard mentioned earlier, will obviously develop over time in a different way. But I think it's really important that the First Nations have the controlling interest over what goes through their land, and that's the deal.
Right. So let's get everybody involved. Yeah.
Sorry, if I can just add, David, to that. I love the idea. I think our governments for too long have not had big ideas. I talk about big ideas in the book that you referenced in my book. And what's interesting is a Northern Development Corridor and a Canadian Development Corridor was suggested in 1968.
That's right.
By General Richard Romer, who was one of our heroes, fought in the Second World War. He's 102 years old today, and an amazing guy. But so he was really a prescient when he talked about that. But this is the kind of big idea. And you mentioned the railroad, of course. What a uniting factor for our country. And some sort of Northern Development Corridor would do the same thing. I think it would be a big idea that Canadians could get behind. And another thing I deplore is the fact that we don't have a vision for our country. What is our country going to be? And Robert, you're fully 100%. I'm with you 100%. Another big idea I suggest is let's be energy self-sufficient by such a date.
Yeah.
There's a big project for us. Stop buying oil from Venezuela. Stop sending it other places. Let's be self-sufficient. What does that mean? Well, it would mean a whole bunch of smaller projects that would bring us together. So a vision for our country. Big ideas such as this development corridor. I'm impressed with Premier Canoe. I think he's doing a pretty good job as far as thinking of ideas for our country. So I'm, and I think he's also one of the ones I heard mentioning at a meeting of the first ministers, one of the only first ministers who said we should be paying our way as far as the military goes. He said, even if we have to tighten up our belt, we should be going to the 2% or beyond of GDP that NATO, that we signed up for, by the way. But anyhow,
Right on.
so I love these big ideas. I think we need more of them, and good for him.
Well, panel, you're getting some nice compliments here. Zach says, well-informed panel. Nice to see some thoughtful discussion. So that's nice to hear guests give useful discussion and insight. So that's great. We've seen a number of those compliments. We appreciate them. Make sure you like the discussion. That helps us get out to a bigger audience. And I do want to make a bit of an announcement today, just to let you know that we're very proud that we're one of the programs that is affiliated with both the Miracle Channel as well as Merit TV Canada. And the cable providers continue to open up. So we're now accessible on 11 million households across this coast to coast to coast. So we want to get the word out. Information is important for Canadians as they think about involvement in our free and democratic society. So we're really excited about that. Make sure you look at your local cable provider to see where you can find us. So on a related note, we've talked a little bit about moving our economy forward. I did want to highlight that at Frontier, we did release a few weeks ago a list of some 12 policy ideas to move us forward, and there they are. And one of them has to do with not only open and free internal markets, especially as we talk about Canada where we don't have free trade. I know there's been the deadline of so-called July 1st, so let's see. I'm not sure if I'm going to hold my breath on that one, but wouldn't that be great if we could do that? And one of them has to do with energy, as we look at the importance of moving forward our energy economy. So I have some questions for the panel. One is, can we really move Canada forward if we continue the endless war on Canadian oil and gas? Is it really possible to move forward our country? The last time I checked, one of the foundational things to any economy is, what is it again? Oh yeah, dependable, affordable, reliable energy. And this seems like one of the ace cards as a country that we have not been playing. In fact, we've been undermining. So who wants to tackle that one?
I think we all agree. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Michel?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you look at a third world country, you look at, for example, India or China. They're trying to pull their people out of poverty and everything. And so when you talk to them about the climate and all that, they're going to burn coal because that's how they're going to heat themselves and cook and everything. And that's only because they're trying to pull themselves out of poverty. So is our country going to be able to survive or move forward without oil and gas? And not just that, but rare minerals, potash. I mean, those things that the resources that we have, that we can help other nations also become greener. I mean, that's really, I think, unless we start focusing on that. And somebody, I think Guilbeault said that the demand for oil is going to start going down. Well, it hasn't for the last 50 years, and I don't think it's going to go down for a while yet. I would say give it another 50 years and then see. But so I really think the answer is yes, we need oil and gas and other resources from Canada to be able to move forward and renew our country.
Robert or Dorothy, any quick comment there?
Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I agree. The energy needs to move forward. I think this is a long debate that we had in caucus over many years. And obviously, the solution that was eventually come up with was the tax on carbon. The issue I think we're facing, though, is a lot of our trade agreements with places like the European Union, not the United States, but the European Union, do have climate clauses in them and chapters on that. And I think we have to be very careful in how we go about doing this. We have to be a little bit more thoughtful. It's not just about developing, but making sure that that we're also at the same time making ourselves more energy efficient in what we do. And it's in our old buildings, it's in our old schools, it's the use of the amount of energy we do, and so that we can honestly say to our partners in our trade deals that we don't get hit with a cudgel in another way with tariffs, because I know the EU trade agreement that we signed, the CETA, we call it, does actually contain instruments that if we don't meet certain targets or certain goals, we can actually be hit with tariffs in return. So we have to, we have to think about that. That is a large consideration. It's not going to be an impact with the United States in that way, the same issue, but at the same time, we just have to look after ourselves and think about all of those things from different perspectives, which I think is one of the things I always think about the government often lacks a little bit. We make quick, rash decisions without taking the time to look at things from different parties who might be looking at the same situation from their vantage point to better understand what they want, but also to better understand how we can better get what we need and what we want for our own country and our own people.
Indeed. One thing I did want to pick up there, because Robert, I think you state, well, we have to look at some of these policy issues from a variety of perspectives. And I would credit you, Michel, for crystallizing in my own mind, and certainly I've had discussions with parties in the Trump administration, a perspective that I think Canadians don't get. And that is that from the American point of view, they see their primary relationship, their lens, if you will, as Canada through a security lens. So it goes to your point about the urgency to rebuild our NATO partnership, because we're well known as being, certainly not just by the United States, but internationally in NATO, as a NATO free laggard, as rebuilding the NATO, because if we don't do that, we're not at the security table. And if you're not at the security table, you're not seen as having a seat at the economic table. And I think that's something that, I think you've experienced and helped me certainly appreciate and understand better. Can you explain to us more about that?
I think, first of all, if you look at the way we were treated by Donald Trump, just imagine though, if we had been, before this happened, if we'd been economically strong, we had pipelines going across Canada, we were supplying Asia with clean gas so that they could get off coal. If we were supplying Europe with gas as well that could replace the Russian gas. If our country had a strong armed forces that could defend our country, we can't defend ourselves right now. If we'd spent more than the 2% that's required by NATO of GDP on armed forces, I personally don't think that Trump would have treated us that way. I don't believe he would have, talked about the 51st state. He would have seen a strong, confident nation, and he would have, treated us, I think, like the sovereign nation that we are. So it has, the strength of the armed forces, the fact that we're able to defend ourselves, we're able to participate in missions where we want to go and support our values and defend our values with other nations. I mean, this is what the armed forces are for. They're also a huge diplomatic tool. When a ship goes off to another country, our sailors are seen by the people, and it's a great diplomatic tool. So this has more of an impact than just defending our country or having an impact on whether the United States think we're strong enough. We have been such a laggard for so long, and in my view, the simplest thing to do is you take a blank sheet of paper and you try to calculate, what do we need to defend our country? The Arctic. And as we've all said, the Arctic is going to become more navigable. So what do we need to defend our country? How many units, how many ships, how many airplanes? And then you add to that, what do we want to how do we want to participate in allied missions outside the country, international missions? And then you just add all that up. It's going to come to much more than 2 or 3%. I think if you're going to be, truthful about this and prepared to pay for it, you're going to find that you're going to develop an armed forces that are capable, and you'll be able to be seen by others also to be doing something.
I think we should look at it the same way that the U.S. looked at it when they were supplying Ukraine. You're building these products in your own country. You're actually contributing to your own GDP, and so stop looking at it as a straight loss. We've got to build, and we should be building here. I just wanted to mention one thing about the oil and gas and new markets. It isn't all about Europe, although Germany is champing at the bit to get oil and gas from us right now, or LNG is the big thing. But I've been to Europe several times in the last 2 years, and Mongolia to Vietnam to Taiwan. And they're all in the same boat. They're all energy poor, and they would just die to get their hands on some of Canada's energy. LNG seems like a reasonable way to send it by ship, and it's very efficient. And it also, if you really care about emissions, it's a big reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by about 40% over coal, which they burn a lot of. So there's just a whole mass of things that we can do to sustain our own economy if we just become a little bit more resourceful and get out there and get it done.
All right, let's get her done. I like that Canadian attitude and spirit panel. So with that note, I want to talk about, well, a difficult relationship topic. It sounds like Canada's a little bit on the rocks when we talk about national unity. We've seen some of the polls, some Alberta polls, and I do take polls with a grain of salt. But if we look at Alberta, we notice that depending on polls that you're looking at, some 30-40% are open to some form of sovereignty outside of Canada. And I know that that's a little bit ill-defined, so that's interesting. I know in BC it's 28%. I've seen a poll there. And I've seen other polls related to, well, parts of Manitoba even, that say maybe we should be pursuing something else with Western Canada. So, and Saskatchewan has its own polls as well. So, golly, there's a lot of heartache going on in our country. As I listen carefully to a number of these leaders, it all revolves around the point that how dare the federal government get outside its constitutional lane and continue to interfere with our ability as a province, I'm thinking of Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular right now, to pursue our economic development. Instead of enabling us to prosper, they've got their fingers in there. But it's also, I think, one of values. I listened to some of them. I just had a conversation with Dennis Dr. Modray, one of the chairs of the Alberta Prosperity Project, among others, constitutional lawyer Jeff Rath. I mean, these are people that are pretty intent on this. So if you were Prime Minister Mark Carney, what would you do to start mitigating this sovereignty outside of Canada movement and start bringing this country together? What is your prescription? I'm looking at this as a physician's panel on national unity here. So who wants to go first, Robert?
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. I think it comes back to how people are feeling. It's, is there a chicken in every pot, and are people feeling somewhat confident and comfortable at home? And if Albertans can't afford life in Alberta, which is one reason a lot of people move to Alberta, is not just the work, but the quality of life that they can get, clear skies, open fields, a lot of driving to the mountains if you want, and skiing if you want in the winter. But really, if you can't afford to just even have an inexpensive rental, or the quality of the rental is very low, it's people become angry over time. And when they don't see their check go very far, they're not excited. And but I will say, like, I know you mentioned Alberta be feeling stymied in getting their oil to market. Technically, under the Canadian Constitution, and perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, if there is resources that cross a provincial boundary and there is an environmental assessment which needs to be done, it does become a federal matter. And so any pipeline that does cross a provincial boundary becomes a provincial matter. It doesn't mean Alberta can't develop their resources. It just means that they have difficulty getting it outside. Now, I think Alberta needs to make not just a case about separation to the rest of the country. They need to make a case on why it's going to be good for Canada, to convince voters in Ontario that this will be good for them, good for voters in Quebec. And I don't think they've taken that time. I know Danielle Smith's taken trips down to Texas. She's been to Mar-a-Lago to see President Trump, but she needs to go. Perhaps, yeah, there she is. She needs to go and see François Legault, the leader of the Coalition Avenir Québec, who is the premier of Quebec, in Quebec City and in Montreal, and make a case for Alberta oil and how it's going to be good, not just for Alberta, but for Quebec, and how there might be jobs in shipping oil out of the Montreal ports, shipping oil, or even other resources, potash going through, the Great Lakes. There are so many things that could be happening for our economy, and they haven't made a good case for it. I don't think to an anchor case perhaps, but I'm not sure you get friends by being too angry.
But they're not alone. I spoke this week with somebody from Newfoundland, a former member of Parliament from there, and they're very frustrated in Newfoundland too about some of the restrictions on their ability to sell their oil and gas. So there needs to be a real rethink. And you said, what would be the thing to do? I think whoever the Prime Minister is, he has to listen. The last one didn't. He very, very, very rarely met with these guys. You have to listen, and listen with your whole heart and your whole mind, saying, okay, let's see what everybody has to say. Let's see where there are commonalities. Let's see where there are divisions we can't resolve. And it's not going to be done overnight. It's not going to happen by June the 1st, but at least it starts to reduce that sense of anger and feeling of people feel so left out, so marginalized. So that's why they want to go, because if you don't want us, why should we stay? But it isn't just Alberta.
I will add to that, what you said, Dorothy, is exactly right. The Prime Minister has to listen, but he also has to lead. And I disagree with you, Robert, that it's Danielle Smith's job to go convince Ontario and Quebec. It's the Prime Minister's job to do that. Yeah. It's the Prime Minister's job to lead, to decide, here's a project that is good for Canada. And what he needs to do, what he must do, is go out to different regions and explain, oh yeah, well, maybe you don't like pipelines in Quebec, but this is good for the entire country. And he goes to Quebec also. Quebec is getting oil from Venezuela right now. Imagine if they got some oil from Newfoundland or from Alberta for that matter. But to me, this is where the leadership needs to come in. A leader who's going to say, look, we have a vision for our country. Here's a couple of big projects, and we've talked about some of them, like the Northern Corridor. But also, here's why this is important for the entire country. And by the way, if you make the entire country successful, it's going to have a rebounding to all the individual provinces. But I really think it needs to be leadership. Yes, stay out of the provincial kind of jurisdictions. Yeah. But if it's something that goes beyond one province, then it's the Prime Minister's job. It's not, in my view, Premier Smith that has to go and, she goes to in fact, going to the States, if our Prime Minister, if at that time we had no leader nationally, but if we'd had one, he would or she would have gone down south to talk to Trump. So anyhow, I think we need more stronger leadership at the federal level.
So listening and leading. And it is very interesting. I think part of the whole concept, the vision of this country was multiple fold, one of which was, regardless of where you came from, regardless of your background, you could become Canadian and have that sense of citizenship and working together as a team. But I find that it's frustrating to me as a Canadian if I see places like Quebec importing energy, and I think this is mentioned in the chat by Great to Be Back, oil from, well, places like Venezuela, which I think are kind of nasty regimes, instead of importing their oil from fellow Canadians. And I think that should be the vision, is we should be working together as a united nation. And that's where I think that leadership would be in order too. So I take your point, Michel.
Hey, but David, do you remember that? Do you remember that time there was that campaign about diamonds from Africa? And many of the countries will call them blood diamonds and have them certified and make sure that they support your values. I think Alberta has great human rights. Obviously, it's a democratic located jurisdiction. They're part of our country. They're our brothers and sisters. We should be making the case to all Canadians that this is the oil we want to be using. And we want a Newfoundland oil. We want that oil from ourselves. Look after ourselves, and then, we don't need the oil from Saudi Arabia.
You look what Norway's done, Robert. You look at what Norway's done. I mean, they have a sovereign wealth fund right now that's got I think $1.5 trillion to help Norwegians because they found oil and they've enriched their country.
Yeah.
Right on. So let us join hands together as Canadians and rebuild this country, move it forward. Yeah, hands up instead. Well, I don't know.
Get the elbows up.
Or
No,
we should
no.
Probably no. We should have our
Hands
heads
out.
up. That's probably the key.
Hands up.
Our heads up, and being able to work together as a team to look at how we can move the country forward in every way. And so we've got to look at this historic time. And it's been a far-reaching conversation. I just really appreciate you, the panelists, for joining us for this conversation in the audience. It's been quite a far-reaching one. But if I had one final question, it would be, and I know this is a little bit verging on a crystal ball, but if you had to predict how much time we have with this new federal government to kind of get things in order, how would you answer that question? Is there a window here at play, or am I being too simplistic? Dorothy, do you want to take a run at that one?
Well, it's a real tough one. I think Canadians are very much waiting. And even those who voted for this government, they're still not all completely convinced. So I would expect that the sense that the news that there's no budget is one that's given the people a lot to think about, set them back a little bit. Why wouldn't you have a budget? Why wouldn't you have at least an economic statement? That seems to be really strange. And if the government doesn't start moving in a positive way to meet some of the expectations they built themselves, I think they're going to have some trouble. They still do have a minority. There are still questions. 3 seats still being recounted. Don't know why that's taking so long. Quebec is looking at taking that riding to court that had the 1-point majority because of a technicality in the Elections Canada mailing. So it's really hard to predict. It could be quite short.
Robert?
I think Mark Carney probably has, and it's going to play on what he does this summer for Mark Carney.
Mm-hmm.
If Mark Carney spends the summer just doing barbecue circuits and taking time off to relax with his family and visiting France and England again, he's going to have big problems. And I think he needs to get out in a formal way, consult with Canadians, find out what their priorities are, talk to Alberta, do consulting tours, even though it might get quite difficult in some places, getting briefing notes to get that budget ready and show that they're actually working on something and it's going to be important. And if they spend the next 100 days doing the barbecue circuit or just eating hamburgers and chilling out, they're not going to go very far. And I don't think this will be a long-lasting government as soon as the NDP pick a new leader.
Summer. What about you, General Michel Maisonneuve?
I think 6 months at the most. If we don't see some action in 6 months, and there are a lot of things he can do. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. Certainly, the armed forces is one. Armed forces, when you give them an order, usually things happen very quickly. So, he just needs to get going. Show a few. He's got to have some wins very soon, because the other thing, of course, is things go as they're meant to go. I hope. Then we'll have the leader of the opposition will be in Parliament, and will make his life hell, I think, if he doesn't make some adjustments immediately and show some wins. And as far as listening to the country, Robert, I would say that again, he had a great statement when he talked to Trump. He said, "I've been talking to the owners of Canada." I thought that was a fantastic way of explaining it, and in fact, so that's what happens during an election. He goes out and he speaks to Canadians, so he ought to know what people are saying. And if he heard what happened in Alberta, then he should know that Albertans are getting fed up.
He still needs to go see him, talk to him.
Yeah.
Well, it's been delightful to have this conversation. I want to thank you, Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve, former MP Dorothy Dobbie, and former MP Robert-Falcon Ouellette. Thank you for this conversation. I want to thank the audience as we consider how we move this country forward and get it rolling again. This is important conversations. Please share it with your friends and family, your fellow Canadians. This is a time where we need to move together more than ever as a united country, in my humble opinion. And we need to have those difficult conversations, even about national unity, because we need to address these issues and we need to up our game. We need to become better than we were in the past. So let's move together. And so thanks again for joining us, and be sure to check out us on the Miracle Network as well as Merit TV Canada. And until next Thursday, we look forward to the discussion and have a great week.
Merci beaucoup. Take care.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.